In the heart of Lagos, where ambition flowed through the streets like electricity, Madame Stella's reputation sparkled like a diamond among stones. Her shop, Stella's Touch, stood between a bustling market and a row of modern boutiques, a perfect metaphor for how she bridged the gap between ordinary lives and extraordinary dreams. Women of all social classes would pass by, their eyes lingering on the elegant storefront, whispering about the miracles that happened within. What these women didn't know, couldn't know, was that Madame Stella watched them all from behind her tinted windows, her dark eyes calculating, her fingers absently stroking the silk scarf that always adorned her neck. She saw their desperation, their hope, their hunger for transformation. She saw it, and she smiled. A line outside her shop began forming before dawn each day. Market women with faded wigs clutched precious savings in their hands. Bank executives in designer suits checked their watches impatiently. University students giggled nervously, sharing stories they'd heard on social media about overnight success stories. They all came, drawn by the whispers that spread through beauty salons, church gatherings, and social clubs. Madame Stella doesn't just revamp wigs, she revamps lives. Her rule was simple, yet strange. One wig at a time, no exceptions. When wealthy customers offered to pay double, triple, even 10 times her fee to bend this rule, Madame Stella would simply smile and shake her head. Some things, she would say in her honeyed voice, are more precious than money. The rejection only made them want her services more. Inside the shop, everything gleamed with an unnatural perfection. The mirrors seemed to reflect not just appearances, but possibilities. The air carried a faint scent that no one could quite identify, something between ocean spray and night blooming jasmine. And in the corner sat a large woven basket where customers would deposit their wigs, each one carrying the weight of its owner's hopes. What fascinated people most was how Madame Stella worked alone. No assistants, no apprentices. The touch must remain pure, she would say when asked, her fingers moving with hypnotic grace as she transformed listless synthetic fibers into crowns of glory. But if anyone had looked closely, truly closely, they might have noticed how the water in her spray bottle sometimes moved against gravity, or how shadows in the shop didn't always match the objects casting them. The transformation process took exactly 3 days, no more, no less. When customers returned, Madame Stella would present their wig in a black bag, sealed with a ribbon that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her final instruction never varied. Do not open the bag until you reach home. Most found this request odd, but in a city where success often wore a mysterious face, who were they to question the methods of a miracle worker? Little did they know that each sealed bag carried more than just restored hair. Each ribbon tied shut more than just a package. And every time Madame Stella watched a customer leave with their precious cargo, the smile that played across her lips held secrets dark enough to drown in, literally. As Lagos hummed with life outside, as women dreamed of their impending transformations, as social media buzzed with before and after pictures, Madame Stella's shop continued its brisk trade in miracles. And somewhere, in the depths of waters no human eye could see, something stirred, waiting for payment to come due. Amara stood before her mirror, gently running her fingers through her prized wig, a handcrafted piece that had cost 3 months' salary when she'd first bought it. Now, after years of wear, it had lost its luster, much like her dreams of breakthrough in Lagos's cutthroat business world. What she didn't realize was that her decision to visit Stella's Touch would ripple through time, affecting not just her destiny, but the fates of countless others who would follow her path. The morning she entered Madame Stella's shop, the air felt different, heavier, as if the atmosphere itself knew something she didn't. Other customers in line whispered about recent successes. A shopkeeper who now owned a plaza, a teacher who married a senator, a struggling actress who landed 3 movie deals in 1 week. Almara listened, hope and skepticism wrestling in her mind, while somewhere in the spiritual realm, unseen forces stirred in anticipation. Madame Stella received her with that famous smile, the one that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets behind perfect teeth. As Amara handed over her wig, she felt a subtle resistance, as if the wig itself were trying to warn her. But Madame Stella's fingers closed around it with practiced grace, and the moment passed. 3 days, she said. her voice carrying an echo that seemed to come from somewhere deep underwater. Remember, don't open the bag until you're home. Those 3 days of waiting were torture for Amara, though she would later look back on them as her last moments of true peace. She dreamed of water each night, vast, dark expanses that called to her with voices she couldn't quite understand. In her office at the struggling consulting firm where she worked, her colleagues noticed how she kept glancing at her phone, counting down the hours until she could retrieve her wig. When the third day arrived, Almara's hands trembled as she accepted the black bag. The ribbon seemed to pulse against her fingers, but she convinced herself it was just her imagination. The bag felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained more than just a wig. Later, others would report the same sensation, but by then, it would be too late for warnings. At home, Amara opened the bag with the reverence of someone unwrapping a holy relic. The wig that emerged was perfection itself, gleaming, full of life, almost seeming to move on its own in the dim light of her bedroom. What she couldn't see were the invisible threads of power now woven into each strand, or the water spirits that had claimed her destiny as their new playground. The changes began immediately. That very evening, her phone rang with news that would change her life. The $1 million contract she'd been pursuing for months had been approved. Her colleagues, who had been whispering about her imminent firing just days before, now gathered around her desk with congratulations and forced smiles. None of them noticed how the water in their coffee cups rippled when she walked past. Within weeks, Amar's life transformed into a fairy tale. A chance meeting with a billionaire at a business conference led to a whirlwind romance. He showered her with gifts, a mansion in Banana Island, a fleet of luxury cars, designer wardrobes that cost more than her previous annual salary. Success clung to her like a perfume, drawing more opportunities, more connections, more wealth. Women in her social circle began asking about her secret. Amara, drunk on success and blind to the darkness lurking beneath her good fortune, shared the story of Madame Stella's shop. She didn't notice how each time she told the tale, the wig on her head seemed to tighten ever so slightly, or how her reflection in mirrors sometimes rippled like disturbed water. In her moments alone, if she had looked carefully, she might have seen the truth written in small signs. How plants wilted when she passed them, how her expensive perfumes turned to salt water overnight, how her dreams increasingly filled with the sound of waves and distant chanting. But Amara saw only what she wanted to see: her rise to the top of Lagos society, her imminent marriage to one of Nigeria's most eligible bachelors, her face splashed across magazines and social media. Little did she know that each step up the ladder of success was actually a step deeper into waters from which few ever returned. And in her shop, Madame Stella watched through her mysterious mirrors as more and more women followed Amara's path, each one a new thread in a web of darkness that grew stronger with every transformed wig. The first crack in Amara's perfect world appeared on a sweltering Lagos afternoon, when the air hung thick with dust and unfulfilled promises. She was stepping out of her customized Range Rover, designer handbag swinging from her arm, when she saw the beggar. Later, she would realize that the woman had been there all along, watching, waiting, knowing exactly what was to come. The beggar sat in the shadow of a flowering almond tree, her threadbare wrapper arranged with a dignity that seemed at odds with her circumstances. What caught Amara's attention wasn't the woman's outstretched hand or her weathered face, but her eyes, ancient, knowing eyes that seemed to hold depths as vast as the ocean itself. Those same eyes had watched countless others like Amara rise and fall, had witnessed the cycle of Madame Stella's magic play out time and time again. "Here," Amara said, reaching into her bag for a crisp 5,000 naira note. The transaction should have been simple, the kind of casual charity that successful Lagos women dispense daily to ease their consciences. But when she extended the money, the beggar recoiled as if Amara had offered her a handful of snakes. "Your money carries darkness," the beggar whispered, her voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "It smells of salt water and broken promises." Around them, the afternoon traffic continued its chaotic dance, but in that moment, time seemed to slow, the air growing thick with unseen presence. A nearby puddle rippled, though there was no wind. The beggar's words burrowed into Amara's mind like parasites, refusing to be dismissed. That night, As she lay in her king-size bed in her Banana Island mansion, the first nightmare came. The dream waters were cold and dark, pressing against her from all sides with the weight of accumulated sins. In the depths, she could hear singing, beautiful, terrible songs in languages that had been old when the world was young. She thrashed and struggled, but each movement only drew her deeper into the absolute darkness. She awoke gasping, her silk sheets drenched not with sweat, but with water that tasted of the sea. Her billionaire fan stirred beside her, mumbling in his sleep about waves and shadows and debts coming due. Neither of them noticed how the expensive artwork on their bedroom walls had begun to show signs of water damage, or how the mirrors now reflected scenes from ocean depths that shouldn't exist. The phone call came the next morning. Amara was in her office, reviewing contracts for a new business acquisition, when her screen lit up with an unknown number. The voice on the other end spoke with the sound of water flowing over stones. "You've taken what is not yours. Now it's time to pay." Later, when she tried to check her call history to trace the number, she found nothing, no record of any call during that hour. But the words remained, echoing in her mind like waves against a distant shore. Her assistant, bringing in her usual morning coffee, paused at the door, startled by how Amara's shadow seemed to writhe on the wall like seaweed in a current. The signs multiplied, subtle at first, but growing more insistent. Her expensive perfumes turned to salt water overnight. Plants withered when she walked past, their leaves crumbling as if blasted by ocean spray. In meetings, colleagues began to notice how water glasses would ripple when she spoke, how the air around her sometimes smelled of seaweed and decay. But it was the dreams that truly began to break her. Each night, the waters grew deeper, colder, more insistent. She would find herself sinking through layers of darkness, past shapes that shouldn't exist, while distant voices chanted her name in rhythm with the tide. Sometimes she caught glimpses of other women in these depths, familiar faces from Lagos high society, all of them wearing perfect wigs, all of them sinking, sinking, sinking. The wig itself began to feel heavy on her head, as if weighted with water. When she looked in mirrors, she sometimes caught it moving of its own accord, the strands undulating like anemones in an unseen current. But each time she considered removing it, a deep terror seized her, a bone-deep knowledge that the wig had become more than just an accessory. It had become her anchor to success, to her new life, to everything she had gained. And through it all, Madame Stella's shop continued its brisk trade, the line of hopeful customers growing longer each day. From her private room, surrounded by bowls of blood-red water, Madame Stella watched Amara struggling through her mysterious mirrors. She saw the nightmare waters rising, saw the spirits growing restless, and smiled her knowing smile. After all, every miracle had its price, and the waters always collected their due. The destruction of Amara's world began not with a bang, but with the soft ping of an email notification. She sat in her corner office, the Lagos skyline sprawling before her through floor-to-ceiling windows that had begun to show strange patterns of condensation, like tears tracking down glass. The message was brief. The firm she had just signed a multi-million-dollar deal with was pulling out due to unforeseen circumstances. What the sender couldn't have known was that at the exact moment Amara read those words, every water cooler in the building simultaneously rippled, their contents briefly turning dark as ocean depths. Outside her office, her colleagues whispered behind their hands, their voices carrying the rhythm of waves against rocks. They had seen such falls before in Lagos's corporate world, but never one so swift, so complete. None of them noticed how their coffee cups trembled when they spoke her name, or how the potted plants in the office corridor had begun to smell of seaweed and decay. Amra's attempts to salvage the situation grew increasingly desperate. She called contacts, scheduled meetings, pulled strings that had seemed unbreakable just days before, but each effort met the same response: silence, or worse, the sound of water rushing through phone lines, drowning out voices mid-conversation. Her business empire, built on the foundation of Madame Stella's supernatural intervention, was dissolving like salt in water. The real horror awaited her at home. Police vehicles surrounded her mansion, their blue lights cutting through the evening haze like searchlights penetrating ocean depths. Her billionaire fans, they informed her, had been involved in massive fraud. All assets were frozen, all properties sealed. As they spoke, Omar noticed how their badges seemed to weep water, how their footprints on her marble floors left traces of salt. That night, she returned to her old apartment, a space that felt both foreign and frighteningly familiar. The walls seemed to pulse with remembered dreams of drowning, and in every mirror, her reflection rippled like a face seen through disturbed water. The wig, that perfectly restored piece that had started it all, sat on her dresser, somehow untouched by the chaos, its strands moving slightly in air that should have been still. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no relief. In her dreams, she sank through layers of cold, dark water, past the floating forms of other women, all wearing perfect wigs, all reaching out with desperate hands as they descended into the abyss. She heard their voices, a chorus of broken dreams and bitter regrets, all speaking of a woman named Madame Stella and promises that turned to poison. The next morning, Amr dragged herself to her bank, hope fading with each step. The manager, a woman who had once fawned over her presence, now looked through her as if she were already a ghost. The verdict was impossible yet irrefutable. Her account showed no history of transactions, no record of the millions that had flowed through them. It was as if her entire financial existence had been washed away by an invisible tide. Then came the call that shattered what remained of her world. Her uncle's voice, breaking with grief, informed her that her mother and brother had been found in their beds, their bodies inexplicably drenched in salt water. Though no pipes had burst, no rain had fallen. The doctors would later write it off as a medical mystery, never noticing how their pens leaked seawater instead of ink as they signed the death certificates. In the depths of her despair, Amar finally understood the true nature of Madame Stella's magic. Success had never been given. It had been borrowed from the water spirits, and now they were collecting their debt with interest paid in tears and blood. Each blessing had been a hook, each miracle a net, drawing her deeper into waters from which there was no escape. Throughout Lagos, others who had visited Stella's touch began to feel the first tremors of their own impending doom. Their perfect wigs seemed heavier each day, their mirrors showed strange shadows moving in the depths, and their dreams filled with the sound of waves and distant chanting. But they kept these fears to themselves, each believing their nightmare was unique, never realizing they were all caught in the same dark current. And in her shop, Madame Stella continued her trade, her smile never wavering as she handed out more black bags to eager customers. The water in her hidden bowls grew darker with each passing day, thick with the essence of shattered dreams and broken lives. She knew, as she had always known, that the waters would rise until they consumed everything, but that was a price she was willing to let others pay. The day Uni broke Madame Stella's cardinal rule began like any other at the famous shop. The morning sun cast strange shadows through the tinted windows, and the line of customers stretched around the corner, their hopes rising like mist from the Lagos streets. What no one knew, not even Madame Stella herself, was that this day would tear the veil between the seen and unseen worlds. Uni stood in line with her best friend Diola, both of them university students dressed in trendy clothes that spoke of comfortable backgrounds, but not yet wealth. Their dreams, like those of so many young women in Lagos, were bigger than their current circumstances. Diola watched with growing unease as her friend clutched the wig she'd inherited from her mother, a precious piece that had seen better days. Everyone says Madame Stella is magic, Uni whispered, her eyes shining with the kind of hope that often blinds people to danger. Did you hear about that girl who got a job at an oil company right after getting her wig done here? Or the lecturer who married a commissioner? But Diola felt something wrong in the air, a heaviness that made it difficult to breathe, a scent like ocean spray where there should be none. These rules she has, Diola said, her voice carrying a warning her friend wouldn't heed. They're strange, aren't they? Why can't you open the bag until you get home? In her private room, Madame Stella felt the ripple of discord. The water spirits in their blood-red bowl stirred restlessly, sensing the presence of a doubter. But she continued her work, confident in the power of human desperation to overcome human suspicion. 3 days later, Uni returned to collect her wig, practically bouncing with excitement. The black bag seemed to pulse in her hands, the ribbon around it absorbing light in a way that made Diola's eyes hurt. Standing outside the shop, Uni's fingers played with the ribbon's edge. Don't, Diola warned, but curiosity and defiance had already taken root in Uni's heart. What's the worst that could happen? Uni laughed, her fingers already working at the knot. It's my wig, isn't it? My money, my rules. The ribbon came undone with a sound like waves breaking against rocks. Inside her shop, Madame Stella's head snapped up, her eyes widening in alarm. The water in her ritual bowls began to boil without heat, and the mirrors on her walls showed scenes of oceanic depths where ancient things stirred in anger. The transformation happened in seconds, yet those who witnessed it would say it felt like watching a slow-motion horror film. As Uni opened the bag, the air around her began to ripple like disturbed water. Her skin took on a silvery sheen, her eyes growing large and glassy. She opened her mouth to scream, but only bubbles emerged. The crowd that had gathered watched in horror as Uni's form shifted and twisted, her designer clothes melting away like sea foam. Where a vibrant young woman had stood moments before, now flopped a large, bizarre fish, its scales gleaming with an unnatural iridescence, its eyes holding the last traces of human terror and understanding. Diola's scream shattered the stunned silence. People began to press forward and back away simultaneously, their phones raised to capture the impossible scene unfolding before them. The fish that had been Uni thrashed on the concrete, its movements growing weaker with each passing moment. Madame Stella emerged from her shop, her face a mask of practiced concern and confusion. "What is this chaos?" she demanded, her voice carrying undertones that made nearby water bottles vibrate. "I don't know this girl. She is not my customer." The life flowed smooth as water from her lips, while inside her shop, the blood-red bowls bubbled with malicious glee. The crowd's reactions splintered like light through water. Some screamed, some prayed, some backed away making signs against evil, while others pressed forward, phones recording every detail. In the chaos, no one noticed how the puddles on the street had begun to move against gravity, or how the air had taken on the taste of salt and ancient mysteries. Diola fell to her knees beside the fish, tears streaming down her face. She tried to cradle the creature that had been her friend, but its scales were already growing cold, its movements becoming erratic. As life ebbed away, the fish's eyes, still horrifyingly human, locked onto Diola's face with a look of desperate understanding. By the time Uni's sister Uchi arrived, drawn by Diola's frantic call, it was too late. The fish lay still, its scales already beginning to fade to mundane colors, though the echo of humanity in its form remained, a testament to the price of defying supernatural laws. Above them all, dark clouds gathered unnaturally fast, and the first drops of rain that fell tasted of tears and sea water. Madame Stella retreated into her shop, her face serene despite the tragedy, while whispers and videos of the incident began their viral spread through Lagos's digital networks. The veil had been pierced, but rather than expose the darkness beneath, it only served to deepen the mystery and the danger of Stella's touch. Lagos buzzed with the viral video of Uni's transformation, the footage spreading through WhatsApp groups and Instagram stories like wildfire. But in a city where the line between miracle and manipulation often blurred, the truth fractured into 1,000 different interpretations. Each version of the story that circulated carried its own undertow of hope, fear, and desperate rationalization. Madame Stella, ever the master of perception, moved through the controversy like a shark through dark waters. She appeared on morning shows, her elegant figure perfectly poised, her voice carrying that hypnotic quality that made viewers lean closer to their screens. "These accusations," she would say, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a handkerchief that smelled faintly of sea spray, "are attempts by jealous competitors to destroy a successful black woman's business." The celebrities came to her defense in waves. Famous actresses posted testimonials about their transformed wigs and transformed lives, their social media feeds glossy with success. What their followers couldn't see were the slight tremors in their hands as they recorded these messages, or how their bathroom mirrors had begun showing glimpses of dark waters swirling behind their reflections. "My life changed after visiting Stella's Touch," declared a popular influencer, her perfect wig gleaming under studio lights. The cameras didn't capture how the water in her glass rippled every time she spoke, or how her designer shoes left wet footprints that evaporated too quickly to be natural. In exclusive Lagos neighborhoods, wives of politicians and business tycoons hosted tea parties where they defended Madame Stella between sips from cups that sometimes tasted of salt water. That poor university girl must have been pulling a publicity stunt, they would say, ignoring how their imported flowers wilted whenever they discussed that day's events. But beneath the public spectacle, a current of fear ran deep. In private WhatsApp groups, women began sharing strange experiences: dreams of drowning, unexplained puddles of seawater in locked rooms, the sound of waves coming from empty corridors. Yet few dared to speak openly, afraid of losing the blessings their transformed wigs had brought them. The press took sides, as it always did. Some papers painted Madame Stella as a victim of superstition and jealousy. Others hinted at darker truths, though reporters investigating these angles often found their recordings mysteriously waterlogged, their notes dissolving into unreadable pulp. Meanwhile, in her shop, Madame Stella's business boomed like never before. The controversy had only added to her mystique, drawing clients from across Nigeria and beyond. Women reasoned that if her power was real enough to cause such an incident, surely it was real enough to transform their lives. The line outside her shop grew longer, snaking through streets that somehow always seemed damp despite the dry season. Each customer convinced themselves that they would be different, that they would follow the rules, that the tragedy they'd seen couldn't touch them. They clutched their wigs and their hopes, blind to how the puddles beneath their feet sometimes reflected scenes from ocean depths where ancient things stirred and waited. Diola and Uchi watched this madness unfold with growing horror. They saw how Lagos's elite closed ranks around Madame Stella, how the truth of Uni's transformation was being buried under layers of denial and justification. In upscale salons, women whispered about Uni's unfortunate incident while booking appointments at Stella's Touch. In church meetings, prayers were offered not for the victim, but for protection against those trying to destroy good businesses with demonic accusations. The police investigation into Uni's death stalled in strange ways. Officers complained of evidence files being found soaked through, of security cameras malfunctioning with inexplicable moisture damage. The detective in charge was suddenly transferred after his house was mysteriously flooded one night. All his case notes turned to pulp. But perhaps most terrifying was how quickly people adapted to the possibility of supernatural horror in their midst. As long as success flowed from Madame Stella's touch, they were willing to accept any explanation that let them keep believing in her miracles. They convinced themselves that Uni's fate was an isolated incident, a cautionary tale about following rules rather than a warning about the true cost of quick success. And through it all, Madame Stella's smile grew wider, her eyes deeper, her power more absolute. Each denial, each justification, each desperate rationalization only fed the dark forces she channeled. The water spirits in their blood-red bowls grew stronger with every soul that chose willful blindness over uncomfortable truth. In the depths of her shop, where the air always tasted of salt and secrets, Madame Stella added a new bowl to her collection. This one contained water of an impossible black, and those who looked too long into its depths reported seeing a fish with human eyes, forever swimming in circles, forever trying to scream. In a small apartment on the mainland, where the air conditioner fought a losing battle against Lagos heat, Diola and Uchi began their investigation. They had transformed the living room into a makeshift command center, its walls covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes that sometimes dripped water when no one was looking. What they didn't know was that every piece of evidence they gathered sent ripples through the supernatural world, disturbing ancient powers that preferred to remain hidden. "We'll pose as journalists," Diola suggested, her voice steady despite the nightmares that had plagued her since Uni's transformation. Writing a story about successful women and their beauty secrets. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she knew truth sometimes required deception to reveal itself. Their first interview was with a woman who lived in a mansion that seemed too quiet, too empty for its size. She welcomed them with trembling hands and eyes that kept darting to the swimming pool visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. The water in the pool moved against the wind, but only Diola seemed to notice. "It started wonderfully," the woman whispered, her manicured fingers clutching a teacup that somehow never emptied. "After I got my wig from Madame Stella, I became pregnant after 20 years of trying. My husband's chronic illness vanished overnight. Her voice cracked. We thought it was a miracle. The woman's eyes grew distant, seeing something beyond the perfectly decorated room. And then one morning, I found him by the pool. He was just standing there, staring into the water, mumbling about debts coming due. Before I could reach him, she stopped, tears falling into her teacup, creating ripples that spread impossibly wide. Diola and Uchi exchanged glances, recognizing the pattern they'd begun to see in other stories. The initial miracle, the brief period of joy, then the price, always extracted through water, always devastating in its totality. Their investigation led them to more victims, each story adding another piece to the horrifying puzzle. A former bank executive, now living in a one-room apartment, described how her multi-million naira account had dissolved into nothing overnight. The bank's records showing only transaction histories full of strange symbols that looked like waves. A once famous actress revealed how, after her wig transformation, she'd landed 3 blockbuster roles in a week. But during filming, she whispered, her once beautiful face now gaunt with fear, "The cameras would malfunction around me. The footage would show someone else, something else, wearing my face. They blacklisted me, claiming I was using juju to steal scenes. But it was their encounter with the beggar that changed everything. They found her near a busy marketplace, her appearance so shabby that people walked around her like water flowing around a stone. Yet her eyes held an ancient wisdom that made both women shiver. I was her first," the beggar said without preamble, as if she'd been waiting for them. Before the shop, before the fame, when Madame Stella was just learning to bargain with the water spirits, her voice carried the sound of waves breaking on distant shores. "I was like you once, young, ambitious, desperate for success in a city that eats dreams for breakfast." The beggar's story poured out like a tide. Her meteoric rise in business, her international success, and then the devastating fall that left her with nothing but knowledge of the dark forces at work. "The spirits are hungry," she explained, her eyes reflecting scenes from impossible depths. "They grant power, yes, but they feed on destruction. Each blessing they give must be paid for with a greater curse." As she spoke, puddles formed around her feet despite the dry ground, and the air filled with the scent of ocean spray. "I've spent years studying their ways, learning their weaknesses. The water spirits are bound to Madame Stella through those blood-red bowls in her ritual room. Break that connection, and their power over their victims will end." Diola leaned forward, her journalist notebook forgotten. "But how? We've seen her influence, her protection from powerful people." The beggar's smile held secrets deep as the ocean. "The spirits themselves will help you, if you know how to ask. They're faithful to Madame Stella now because she controls them, but they're ancient things that hate being bound. Give them a chance at freedom, and they'll turn on her in an instant." As if in response to her words, all the water sources nearby, bottles, gutters, even the sweat on people's brows, trembled with anticipation. The beggar pressed a small vial into Uchi's hand, its contents clear, but somehow dark at the same time. "Holy water," she explained, "blessed by 7 churches, and mixed with tears of the betrayed. When the moment comes, you'll know how to use it." As Diola and Uchi left the marketplace, their minds reeling from all they'd learned, they didn't notice how their footprints left no marks on the damp ground, or how the puddles they stepped in seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Behind them, the beggar watched with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of countless dreams in Lagos, knowing that the final confrontation would soon begin. In her shop, Madame Stella felt the shift in spiritual currents. The water in her ritual bowls grew agitated, and the mirrors on her walls showed scenes of gathering storms. She smiled her serene smile, confident in her power, unaware that the very forces she thought she controlled were waiting for their chance at revenge. The night they chose to infiltrate Stella's touch was moonless, the darkness thick as ocean depths. Viola, Uchi, and the beggar moved like shadows through Lagos streets that seemed unusually empty, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Unknown to them, Almira had also chosen this night to confront Madame Stella, driven by the weight of her losses and the drowning dreams that gave her no peace. The shop's back entrance yielded easily to their touch, the lock dissolving into rust and salt water at the beggar's whispered words. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of the sea, though they were miles from the coast. The mirrors that lined the walls reflected impossible scenes: underwater kingdoms, ancient ruins covered in barnacles, and dark shapes that moved with terrible purpose through lightless depths. Their footsteps, no matter how careful, sent ripples across the floor as if they walked on water. The walls seemed to pulse like the sides of some vast marine creature, and from somewhere deeper in the building came the sound of chanting, Madame Stella's voice mixed with others that seemed to echo from the bottom of the ocean. Following the sound, they discovered what no customer had ever seen: the ritual room. Through the partially open door, they witnessed Madame Stella in her true element. Gone was the elegant businesswoman who charmed morning show hosts. In her place stood something both more and less than human, her arms raised as she conducted a chorus of water spirits. The room was dominated by bowls of blood-red water, each one glowing with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Wigs floated in these bowls, absorbing darkness and power. As they watched, Madame Stella lifted a wig from one bowl, her movements fluid and inhuman. The water clung to the wig like living thing, and in its strands, they could see shadows moving, spirits binding themselves to the synthetic fibers. Each spirit grants a wish, the beggar whispered, her voice barely audible over the chanting. But they take far more than they give. They feed on shattered dreams, on drowning hopes, on the despair of watching everything you love turn to water and slip through your fingers. In the ritual bowl, the water began to boil without heat. Faces formed in the steam, faces of women they recognized from Lagos society pages, their expressions twisted in eternal anguish. These were the successful ones, the testimonials, the living advertisements for Madame Stella's power. Yet here, in this room of truth, their suffering fed the very forces that had granted their temporary triumph. Amara, who had slipped in through another entrance, watched from a different corner, her phone recording everything. Her hands trembled, but her grip remained steady as she documented proof of what she had suspected since her own world began to dissolve. Through her phone screen, she could see what the naked eye missed: threads of dark energy connecting each bowl to Madame Stella, and through her to every woman who had ever worn one of her transformed wigs. The air grew thicker, heavier with each passing moment. The chanting reached a crescendo, and in the bowls, the water spirits began to take more distinct forms: beautiful, terrible things with faces that shifted between human and marine creature, their eyes holding the wisdom and cruelty of the deep. Madame Stella's voice rose above the chorus, speaking words in a language older than civilization. As she spoke, the water in the bowls began to swirl, creating miniature whirlpools that seemed to reach down into infinite depths. The wigs she hadn't yet transformed rose from their basket, dancing through the air like seaweed in a current before plunging into the blood-red water. The spirits aren't willing partners, the beggar explained, her eyes reflecting the supernatural light. She binds them to her will, forces them to grant blessings they would rather withhold. But their resentment taints every miracle, turns every gift into a curse. They watched as Madame Stella performed her dark miracle, turning ordinary wigs into conduits for supernatural power. With each transformation, the room grew colder, the air heavier with moisture. Water began to beat on the walls and run upward, defying gravity. In the mirrors, the dark shapes drew closer, pressing against the glass as if seeking escape. The truth was more horrifying than any of them had imagined. This wasn't just a story of cursed wigs or tragic transformations. It was the tale of an ancient power corrupted, of spirits enslaved, of a woman who had found a way to trade in dreams and despair. Every success story that walked out of Stella's touch carried within it the seeds of inevitable destruction, feeding a cycle of hope and horror that had grown too powerful to contain. As they watched, transfixed by the dark spectacle before them, none of them noticed how the water on the floors had begun to move with purpose, forming patterns that looked almost like words. The spirits were stirring, sensing the presence of those who might free them from their bondage. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the waters of Lagos would never be the same. The confrontation began with a single drop of holy water falling from the vial in Uchi's trembling hands. As it struck the surface of the nearest ritual bowl, the room itself seemed to inhale, a moment of perfect stillness before chaos erupted. The blood-red water began to boil, and the chanting that had filled the air transformed into a sound like waves crashing against ancient shores. Madame Stella whirled to face them, her carefully maintained facade cracking to reveal something inhuman beneath. "So," she said, her voice carrying echoes of depths where light had never reached, "you've come to ruin me." The air around her rippled like heat waves, but cold radiated from her presence, bringing with it the smell of salt and decay. "You gave me fortune at first." The beggar stepped forward, her rags suddenly seeming more regal than Madame Stella's expensive clothes. "Just like you did to countless others. But it didn't last. Everything we worked for turned to ash. Our families abandoned us, and we were left with nothing but curses that follow us like shadows." Madame Stella's laugh held no humor, only the sound of water rushing through dark places. "Yet here you are, still alive, a stubborn cockroach clinging to life." Her eyes swept over the group with contempt. "No one will believe you. They love me, worship me. To them, you're nothing but troublemakers, jealous of success you couldn't achieve." But before she could continue, Omar emerged from her hiding place, phone held high, its screen glowing with the damning evidence of the live stream that had been running since she entered. "They're already seeing the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that made her heart race. "All of Lagos is watching your true face." Madame Stella's composure shattered like glass. She screamed, a sound that held nothing human, and the ritual bowls began to pulse with angry light. The water spirits within them took shape, beautiful, terrible forms that writhed between states of matter, their faces shifting between human and marine creature. The beggar acted quickly, flinging the remaining holy water in a wide arc. Where it fell, the blood-red water hissed and steamed, its supernatural glow flickering like a dying light. "The spirits aren't yours to command anymore," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of years spent studying these ancient powers. "Reject them," she shouted to the others. "Reject their power, and they'll be free." Understanding dawned in the spirit's eyes. Countless years of forced servitude could end here now. The water in the bowls began to churn with new purpose, no longer following Madame Stella's will, but seeking their own vengeance. Madame Stella fought back with desperate fury. She spoke words in that ancient language, trying to reassert her control, but her power was slipping. The mirrors on the walls cracked, leaking seawater onto the floors. The ceiling dripped with moisture that defied gravity, falling upward instead of down. "You fool!" she shrieked at the beggar. "You don't understand what you're unleashing." But her words were drowned out by the roar of water breaking free from its bonds. The largest bowl, centered in the room, began to glow with an intensity that hurt the eyes, its contents swirling into a whirlpool that seemed to reach into infinite depths. The water spirits, now free from their enchanted prison, turned on their former master. They rose from the bowls in terrible beauty, their forms fluid and ever-changing, their eyes holding the memory of every broken promise, every shattered dream, every life destroyed in Madame Stella's pursuit of power. In that moment, Madame Stella's true form was revealed, not just a woman who had made a deal with water spirits, but something that had given up its humanity long ago in exchange for power. The spirits surrounded her, their voices joining in a chorus that spoke of judgment and retribution. She fought. Oh, how she fought. Power crackled through the room like lightning through storm clouds, but the spirits were relentless. They had waited too long, suffered too much, to show mercy now. The whirlpool in the central bowl grew stronger, pulling at reality itself. Madame Stella's screams echoed through the shop as the spirits dragged her toward the bowl. Her perfectly manicured nails left scratches in the floor that filled with seawater. In her final moments, her face shifted between masks, the elegant businesswoman, the powerful spiritualist, the ancient thing that had hidden behind human skin, before she was pulled into the waters that had once been her source of power. The bowl pulsed one final time, bright as a heartbeat, then went dark. The other bowls cracked and shattered, their enchanted waters evaporating instantly. The room fell into complete silence, broken only by the soft sound of water dripping from the walls. As the witnesses stood in shocked silence, the beggar moved forward to examine the largest bowl. The spirits had an agreement with her. she explained softly. They warned her that if her evil was ever exposed, they would claim her. She thought she could keep her dark business hidden forever. She shook her head slowly. But nothing remains hidden forever, especially not in waters as deep as these. Outside, a crowd had gathered, drawn by Amara's live stream. They stood in stunned silence as the truth of Madame Stella's power and its price became clear. The water spirits, finally free from their bondage, dispersed into the night air like ocean spray, leaving behind only the salty taste of liberation and justice served. In the days that followed Madame Stella's destruction, Lagos slowly began to heal. The city's waters, which had long carried whispers of unnatural things, gradually returned to their natural rhythms. Rain fell as it should, without the taste of salt and sorrow. Puddles reflected only sky, no longer showing glimpses of dark underwater kingdoms or faces twisted in eternal anguish. The shop, Stella's Touch, stood empty, a hollow shell that seemed to shrink in on itself with each passing day. The group had set it ablaze that night, watching as supernatural flames consumed every trace of the evil that had dwelled within. The fire, witnesses would later say, burned with strange colors and seemed to move like water, but the authorities found no evidence of arson. Only a fine coating of salt remained, crystallizing on the charred walls like tears that had finally dried. For Amara, liberation came in waves. The cursed fortune that had haunted her began to transform into something genuine. Her business skills, no longer tainted by supernatural influence, proved to be her true strength. Clients returned, drawn not by magical manipulation, but by her natural talent and determination. Her bank accounts mysteriously reactivated, though the millions gained through dark magic remained gone. A price she now understood was fair to pay. The beggar, whose name was finally revealed as Mama Peace, found her own form of redemption. No longer bound to wander the streets as a warning to others, she established a small foundation dedicated to helping women build success through legitimate means. Real fortune, she would tell her clients, is like rain that nourishes the earth, not like waves that wash everything away. Throughout the city, other victims of Madame Stella's magic began to find their equilibrium. The water spirits, freed from their forced servitude, withdrew their curses before departing. Women who had suffered mysterious losses saw their fortunes gradually restore, though changed, more modest perhaps, but built on firmer foundations than supernatural intervention could provide. Diola and Uchi continued their journey together, bonded by tragedy but strengthened by purpose. They couldn't bring Uni back. Some transformations, they learned, were beyond undoing, but they could honor her memory. They started a social media movement warning young women about the dangers of seeking quick success through supernatural means. The hashtag #RealSuccessRealStories trended across Nigeria, encouraging women to share authentic stories of achievement. The celebrities who had once endorsed Madame Stella now scrambled to distance themselves, though some reported still hearing the sound of waves in their dreams. Their wigs, once symbols of supernatural blessing, were quietly donated to charity or buried in ceremonies designed to break the last lingering traces of water spirit influence. In upscale neighborhoods, the wives of politicians and business tycoons found themselves hosting different kinds of tea parties, ones where they discussed business strategies and investment opportunities rather than miraculous transformations. The air in these gatherings no longer carried the scent of ocean spray, and the tea tasted only of tea. But perhaps the most profound change was in the city's relationship with success itself. The viral video of Madame Stella's exposure, combined with the subsequent revelations, forced Lagos to confront its obsession with instant achievement. People began to question the true cost of shortcuts, to look more critically at sudden successes that seemed too good to be true. Young women especially, who had once flocked to anyone promising quick transformation of their lives, began to embrace slower, more sustainable paths to success. Beauty parlors reported a rise in customers asking for simple, elegant styles rather than supernatural solutions. The phrase, "What price are you really paying?" became a common caution in discussions about rapid advancement. Yet the story of Madame Stella didn't fade into urban legend as many expected. Instead, it became a parable taught in churches, discussed in business schools, and whispered as a warning in beauty salons. Parents used it to teach their children about patience and honest work. Business mentors referenced it when advising young entrepreneurs about sustainable growth. The water spirits themselves became part of Lagos's spiritual ecosystem in a new way. Fishermen and maritime workers reported seeing strange but benevolent shapes in the lagoon at dawn, beautiful forms that seemed to watch over the waters without interfering. Some said these spirits now served as guardians, ensuring that no one else would ever bind them for dark purposes. In the end, the site where Stella's touch once stood was transformed into a small park with a fountain at its center. The water that flowed there was pure and clear, free from supernatural influence. Yet on quiet nights, if one listened carefully, the splash of the fountain seemed to whisper ancient wisdom. Success built on destruction would always destroy itself in the end. Amara, Diola, and Uchi sometimes met there, sitting by the fountain to remember and reflect. They had learned the hardest way that real transformation of self, of fortune, of society couldn't be bought with magic or shortcuts. It had to be earned through time, effort, and integrity. The true touch of success, Mama Peace would say to anyone who asked about those days, isn't in what you wear on your head, but in how you carry yourself through life's waters. Her words, like ripples in a pond, spread through the city, touching lives and changing perspectives, proving that the most powerful transformations were the ones that came from within.